I don't think I've ever truly understood what fear was until that rainy October afternoon. Before that day, I was like every other 12-year-old, oblivious to the dark things lurking in the world. I had heard the stories, of course, whispers about creepy neighbors or mysterious strangers. But they were just stories, stuff for thrillers and late-night horror movies, never something that could touch me. But that day changed everything. It was a typical lunch period, the kind of grey, soggy day that made you wish for nothing more than a warm blanket and a Netflix binge. The rain had been coming down for hours, and the hallways of the school smelled faintly of wet jackets and soggy sneakers. Kids were crowded in the cafeteria, talking in that loud, messy way only middle schoolers can. A few of my friends and I were sitting at a table, poking fun at some of the teachers and making plans for the weekend. The usual. Life felt normal. Then it happened. The first boom sounded like thunder. You know the kind, the deep, rumbling bass that shakes the walls of your house. At first, I thought it was just the storm. There had been warnings earlier that morning about strong winds and heavy rain, so I figured it was just another roll of thunder. But then it happened again, and again, and again. 3 loud, violent booms, so intense that the plates and glasses in the cafeteria rattled on the tables. People paused mid-sentence. The noise felt wrong, too wrong, like it wasn't from the storm at all. I could see the confusion on everyone's faces, but before anyone had time to react, a loud, crackling voice came through the loudspeakers. "Students, please remain calm. All students are to report immediately to the multipurpose room. Do not leave the building. Do not open any doors or windows." I remember looking around at my friends. We didn't know what to think, but we got up and shuffled towards the exit anyway. We were still laughing at first, nervous giggles, unsure of what was happening. Maybe it was a drill. Maybe it was just a bad joke. But then campus security appeared, running down the hallway, ushering us into the multi-purpose room like cattle. "Stay together. Stay away from the windows," one of the officers barked, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously. He was gripping his radio like his life depended on it. We weren't allowed to talk. The room fell into a tense silence. The lights flickered for a second, and I heard the faint murmur of voices in the hallway. But everything was muffled now, drowned out by the pounding of my heart. And then the worst part? The feeling. The sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. Like something was wrong, and we weren't being told everything. Something wasn't adding up. And then I saw it. The security guard pulled the curtains over the multipurpose room's windows, the same windows that had always been open, giving us a perfect view of the campus lawn. Now, they were completely covered. There were more guards outside, but no one was talking. The exits were blocked off. The heavy, tight air in the room made it harder to breathe, but we were all too afraid to ask questions. No one knew why we were being locked in. No one said a word about what was going on. We just sat there, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. The rain outside pounded harder against the roof, and the sound was almost deafening now, like the world itself was trying to drown us. That's when the whispers started. A few kids had gotten texts, their phones vibrating in their pockets. Someone said something about a man across the street, a neighbor who had barricaded himself in his house, a man who had threatened to kill himself and anyone who tried to make him leave. There were rumors that he had been watching the students, acting strange. That's when the panic really started to set in. I didn't know it at the time, but later I found out the man had been a registered sex offender. The kind of thing that makes your skin crawl when you hear it. And even more terrifying was the fact that he had been watching us. Just watching us. For who knows how long. I tried to keep it together, but I couldn't. The room was suffocating, and every time I glanced at the door or the windows covered with those curtains, I felt like I might choke. I could hear kids breathing too fast, the sound of their chests rising and falling, like they were trying to run away from something they couldn't see. And I don't know why, but my thoughts kept going back to the previous Halloween. My friend Kyle had lived right next door to this man. We used to hang out at his house all the time, playing video games or trading comic books. But now, looking back, I realized how off things had always felt with that guy. I remember Kyle telling me about that Halloween, how the man had been acting strange. He'd put up a lot of decorations, sure, but it wasn't the decorations that were weird. It was the way he had watched the kids. Kyle said the man had been standing in his yard, just staring at the kids as they walked by. Not in a friendly way, but like he was studying them, sizing them up. Kyle had thought it was some kind of prank at the time. He thought maybe it was just a creepy Halloween thing. But now, sitting in the dark, surrounded by whispers and muffled voices, I started to think about it differently. Maybe it hadn't been a prank. Maybe the guy had been trying to get to us all along. Hours passed, and I don't know how, but somehow we were finally told it was over. The man had been taken into custody. No one was hurt. The police and security had everything under control, but something inside me didn't settle. How could I just forget what had happened? The constant anxiety in the room, the terrifying feeling that someone out there across the street was watching us, staring at us. We were allowed to go home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Kyle had said, about how they thought it was just a prank last year, how they had never suspected that the man living next door was more dangerous than anyone realized. When I got home that day, I felt like the walls were closing in. Every shadow seemed like it was hiding something. Every creak of the house was something out of place. I kept thinking about the man's eyes, his stare, the way he'd watched the kids so intently, like we were nothing more than objects to be examined, picked apart. But what terrified me the most wasn't the man, or the fact that he was a registered sex offender. It wasn't even that he had been watching us. It was the idea that we had all ignored the signs. We had all just gone about our lives, assuming the worst thing that could happen was a prank, when the truth was staring us right in the face the entire time. And that's the thing about fear. It's never just the immediate danger that gets to you. It's the aftermath, the realization that things were never as safe as you thought, that someone could have been lurking, waiting, and you never even noticed. After that day, I could never walk past that house the same way again, and I don't think I'll ever be able to. Even if nothing did happen, I'll never forget the terror I felt, the paranoia that crept in, like a poison spreading through my veins. Because sometimes it's not the boogeyman in the closet you need to worry about. Sometimes it's the guy next door. I've always thought of myself as a rational person, the kind who doesn't jump to conclusions, who tries to keep their cool in any situation. I'm sure that's why they asked me to come back after graduation, to help out with a few things in the school's office. Nothing major, just a favor to the staff. After all, I'd been a student there for 4 years. I knew the place like the back of my hand. I didn't think I'd be there long, just a temporary gig to tide me over before I figured out my next move. That's why I didn't think twice when I agreed to spend that Friday afternoon working in the basement. sorting through old files that had been collecting dust for years. It was quiet down there, and I enjoyed the peace. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional shuffle of papers. The basement office wasn't anything special. A small, cramped room filled with file cabinets, shelves lined with old textbooks, and a rickety desk that looked like it had been around since the 80s. The walls were bare, the air stale, and the only window was a tiny one near the ceiling, too high for me to see anything outside. It felt like the kind of place people forget about. I had been there for a few hours when I heard it. The PA system buzzed to life, static crackling over the speakers. "Attention, all students and staff. This is not a drill. Lockdown. Lockdown. There has been a report of a possibly armed intruder on campus. Please secure yourselves in your classrooms and remain calm. Do not open the doors until further notice." At first, I didn't know what to think. My heart skipped a beat. A lockdown? That wasn't something we had planned for. Sure, we'd practiced drills back in high school, but this felt different. The tone of the announcement, the urgency in the voice, it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the usual, "Please remain calm" message we were used to hearing. It felt real. I glanced around the office, trying to figure out what I should do. The basement entry had no door, and the office itself didn't have one either. There was just the open doorway leading to the hallway. I could lock myself in the small storage closet, but that felt like an immediate dead end. The whole place felt exposed, wide open. I felt vulnerable. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked for any updates. Nothing. I couldn't even get a signal down there. Panic started creeping up my spine as I tucked the phone back into my pocket and crawled under the desk. My head was spinning, trying to piece together what was happening. Who was the intruder? Why were they here? Were they even on the premises yet? I should have left the basement right away, but I couldn't. It felt safer in the dark, confined space beneath the desk, surrounded by the shadows. My breath was shallow, my chest tight, my mind racing. It was as though the silence in the room had a weight to it, something heavy and suffocating. I could hear the faint buzz of the lights overhead, the occasional distant shuffle of footsteps in the hallway, but nothing else. The door to the hallway creaked open. I froze. I could hear a man's voice, muffled and distant at first. He was speaking to someone, though I couldn't make out the words. The sounds were garbled, like he was standing just outside the office door. Then the man's figure loomed in the doorway. "I'm here to pick up my daughter," he said, his voice calm. Too calm. It didn't sound right to me. It didn't sound like someone who was supposed to be here. But I had no reason to think otherwise. Yet. I watched his silhouette shift as he stepped further into the room. I could see the outline of his body, the way he moved, slow, deliberate, almost unnatural. It felt like he was invading the space, his presence a dark shadow in the otherwise empty office. Something about him set my nerves on edge. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way to communicate with him without revealing where I was. Was I supposed to say something? Should I ask for a name, or just pretend everything was normal? That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket, the vibration harsh and sudden against the otherwise silent atmosphere. I scrambled to pull it out, barely containing the panic rising in my chest. I opened the text, my hands shaking as I read it. "A man in a red shirt and hat just shot Mr. Buckley in the hallway. The teacher is down. The shooter is still on the loose." My heart stopped. The man in the doorway. He matched the description. A red shirt, a hat. He was right there, standing just feet away from me, blocking any possible escape. My body went cold. I was stuck. There was no other way out. The man at the door shifted again, his footfalls heavy on the floor as he took another step into the room. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear. I kept thinking about Mr. Buckley, the teacher I'd had all through high school. He was a kind man, never the sort to make enemies, and yet, here I was, knowing that someone had just shot him. And now, that same person was standing in the doorway. The man looked around the room, his eyes scanning the cluttered space. Then, without warning, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something cold and metallic. A gun. My stomach dropped. I knew right then that he wasn't here to pick up anyone. He wasn't a parent, and he certainly wasn't going to leave. I had made a fatal mistake by staying hidden. He wasn't just a threat to me. He was a threat to everyone else on this campus. His gaze lingered for a moment. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me under the desk. I couldn't let him know I was here. I needed to think of something, anything. But then, just as I felt my body tense, the man moved. He turned, walking away from the office door, as if he hadn't even seen me. My heart pounded so hard in my chest that I thought it might burst. I felt dizzy with relief, but that relief was short-lived. I saw his back, his red shirt blending into the dark hallway. My chance was slipping away. I had to make a decision. In a flash of instinct, I bolted. I crawled out from under the desk and ran towards the back exit, the one that led to the basement stairs. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I sprinted, every step pounding in my chest. My mind raced as I heard his footsteps getting louder, closer. I reached the basement exit, just as the sound of a gunshot rang through the building. The sharp crack echoed through the air, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My heart was in my throat. I reached the door and threw it open, running down the hallway into the stairwell. The man was behind me now, his footsteps chasing me. I could hear the sound of his breath, ragged, desperate. But just as I reached the end of the hall, I heard another voice, this one shouting, "Police! Get on the ground!" The man was tackled just as he reached the basement exit, his gun skidding across the floor. I froze, my legs shaking beneath me. The officers moved quickly, securing him, handcuffing him with swift precision. I don't know how I managed to escape. I don't know how the bullet missed me. I only know that the terror I felt that day will stay with me forever. Mr. Buckley survived, but no one, not the police, not the school, ever figured out why he'd been shot. The motive was never revealed. And as for me, I don't go back to that basement anymore. Some places just stay with you, and that basement will forever be the place where I learned what real fear feels like. And that's where it ends, at least for me. The memory of that day still lingers. The fear, the chaos, and the sense of helplessness that clung to every second. I may have escaped, but I know I'll never forget what it felt like to be trapped in that basement with an armed man just feet away. So, if you enjoyed the story, or if it made you think twice about the safety of your surroundings, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with your friends, because who knows, maybe they need a reminder of how quickly things can change. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, so you can hear more stories just like this one. If you've had an experience like this, or something that made you feel unsafe when you least expected it, leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Stay safe out there, and remember, you can never be too prepared. You never know what's lurking just around the corner. Thanks for watching. Until next time. I still don't know if I'll ever be able to explain what happened that day. If you asked me now, I'd tell you it felt like some fevered dream, a twisted reality that I couldn't wake up from. But the more I try to push it out of my mind, the more I realize it wasn't a dream. It was real. It happened, and no one, not even the dean or the police, could tell us what really went on. It was a Friday, just another day in calculus class, one of those days when you barely register the passing hours. Mrs. Layton was droning on, trying to explain the intricacies of integrals, but my mind was already slipping into autopilot. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, casting a dull, steady hum across the room. The classroom smelled like stale coffee and old books, the kind of scent that feels like it's been stuck in the walls for decades. The windows were shut, the air a little too warm for comfort, but no one really noticed. Everyone was more concerned with the weekend ahead. The school day was crawling to an end when it happened. The PA system crackled to life. No one really paid it any attention at first. It was just the usual announcements about clubs or upcoming tests. But then something changed. The voice that came through the speakers was different. It wasn't the usual calm, practiced tone of the dean. No, this time there was something raw about it, almost frantic. "Attention, all students and staff," the voice said, trembling slightly. "We are initiating a lockdown. This is not a drill. Please remain in your classrooms, lock the doors, stay away from windows. I repeat, this is not a drill." The words didn't fully sink in at first. I remember glancing around at my classmates, trying to gauge their reactions. They looked as confused as I was. Mrs. Layton just stood there, frozen, her hand still gripping the chalk. It wasn't like the usual lockdown drills we'd had. This felt different. There was no explanation, no calm reassurances, just those words. Not a drill. Then, without warning, the lights went out. You've probably never experienced true darkness in the middle of the day. I'm not talking about dim lighting or a power outage in the middle of a storm. I mean total, unrelenting blackness. It was like the school had been swallowed whole by a void. The kind of darkness that presses down on you, makes your skin crawl, and makes every breath feel heavier than the last. At first, there were the sounds, the shuffle of feet, the soft murmurs of panic, the faint clicking of phones being checked for service that didn't exist. Someone, maybe a student, began to cry softly, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. Mrs. Layton fumbled for her phone, but the signal was gone. She whispered something under her breath, something I couldn't quite make out. I don't think anyone really knew what to do. We huddled in the corner of the room, as far away from the windows as possible, the air thick with tension. And then it happened. A sound. A loud bang, sharp and violent, came from somewhere in the hallway. It echoed off the walls, too loud to ignore. It wasn't just one bang, though. It was a series of them, slamming sounds like metal being battered, a brutal rhythm that made my heart race. At first I thought it was someone messing around, maybe a prank, but then came the screams. "Let me in! Let me in! You bastards!" It was a man's voice, a raw, guttural scream that rattled the windows. His voice cracked with rage, each word laced with venom. He was out there, in the hallway, just beyond the door. The room fell deathly silent. Everyone could hear it. We were all paralyzed, trying to piece together what was happening. Then came the pounding on the door. Heavy fists slamming against the metal, each strike vibrating through the walls. I could almost feel the pressure in my chest, like the air itself was being crushed out of me. The man was right there, just on the other side of that flimsy door. His breathing was ragged, his footsteps heavy, dragging against the floor as he paced in front of the room. "I'll kill you all! I'll kill you all!" he screamed, and every word felt like it was tearing through my mind. His voice was shaking, trembling with some kind of insane energy, as if he was on the brink of breaking down. I couldn't help but imagine what he looked like, pacing out there in the dark. Was he tall? Was he covered in blood? Was he even human? I couldn't stop my mind from racing through those horrible possibilities. And then, like a switch was flipped, the pounding stopped. There was nothing for a moment. Not a sound. Not a single breath. Then came the whisper. "I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing." It was so quiet, so unnervingly soft, I almost didn't hear it at first. But it wasn't the kind of whisper you'd expect. It was like he was right next to me, his voice slipping into my ears, curling into the deepest part of my brain. I could feel the heat of his words. I could feel it too. I could feel him, right there, behind the door. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time stopped making sense. I remember glancing around the room. Some of the kids were crying, some were holding their breath, trying to make themselves as small as possible. Mrs. Layton was pacing now, her phone still dead in her hand. She looked terrified, but there was nothing we could do. The minutes felt like hours, but eventually, the man's voice started to fade. The pounding stopped. The last thing I remember hearing was his footsteps, slowly retreating down the hallway. A door creaked open, then silence. We waited, and waited, and waited. It wasn't until much later, after the sirens, after the flashing lights, that we learned the truth. The man wasn't some random intruder. He had been in the school for hours before we even knew anything was wrong. He'd assaulted the front desk staff in the lobby, left them bruised and bloody before disappearing into the building. Security had done a sweep, but they didn't find him. Not until much later. A janitor found him, hiding in a closet. He was armed, maybe. The janitor didn't stick around long enough to find out. He bolted, and the man ran. Disappeared before the police could even reach the building. They said he was mentally unstable, maybe on drugs, that he was probably long gone by the time anyone showed up. But they never found him. Not then. Not later. His fate remains unknown to this day. But I don't think I'll ever forget the way it felt. The way the air seemed to press down on me, suffocating me. I can still hear the man's voice, even now, whispering in the back of my mind, "I know you're in there." And that's the part that haunts me the most. He knew. He knew we were all hiding, all afraid, and he never got what he wanted. Or did he?